On this episode of Entertainment Education, the podcast, the one with nostalgia, our conversation explores why fantasy remains one of the most enduring and beloved genres across generations, as well as the creative process behind building worlds that feel magical and authentic. We examine the current state of fantasy, storytelling, and discuss emerging trends that are shaping the genre while considering the timeless elements that fans never want to lose. Additionally, we tackle the increasingly relevant question of nostalgia in modern media. Is nostalgia-driven content simply a marketing strategy, or does it represent creators responding to genuine audiences? Joining me for this episode is my friend, fantasy author and sci-fi author Slater Hamilton, and he's also a college professor.
Help Spanish. You're taking 12th grade calculus?
Yeah, I like math.
Ew, why?
Because it's the same in every country.
It's beautiful.
Entertainment Education, the podcast, an 8-part series where host Alan Babiar's Lyra will take you through the journey of how entertainment can educate and create social change.
Oh, yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it.
Hello, 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 my friends. I cannot believe here we are again, episode 2, season 3 of Entertainment Education, the podcast. As always, I am Alan Babiar's Lyra, and you are joining me on a very, very fun topic. And I know, my friends, I say it every episode, but I'm so excited to be joined today by this man, gentleman, whatever you want to call him, sitting across the screen from me. I've gotten to know this man over the past 2 years. We are both colleagues and somebody I'm lucky enough to call a friend now. Today, joining me on this episode about nostalgia and going back and talking about some fun is fantasy author and sci-fi author Slater Hamilton. What's up, my friend?
What is going on? So happy to be here. Thank you for the invite, and always happy to talk about anything nerddom related, and nostalgia hits that to its core. So,
I almost wore my Star Wars shirt just for you today. For
I,
those of us that
I'd be
are
almost concerned that that's your only shirt now because I've seen it so many times.
I know the last time your wife and you were over for dinner, I was wearing it, but
I see the gargoyles on that
I was
one
about to
though.
say I
So,
decided to
yeah,
go
yeah, there's
the
some gargoyle, there's some fantasy action going on.
but a little more nostalgia too of the setting.
But hey, there's a lot of old school ones on that one. So.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk a little bit about your writing, a little bit about nostalgia, and how it impacts all of us. You ready to jump in, my friend?
Absolutely, let's get it going.
Well, I like to start. Let's go back. Let's go back to little Slater when he was about that tall. Uh, how did your interest in fantasy get started?
Well, so fantasy for me started when I was really, really young. My parents, they would go through the read to the kid every night type of thing. And so a lot of the books that I got hooked on, I didn't really want to listen to James Joyce or Dostoevsky when I was a 4 or 5 year old. That's not really my thing. But if you throw something with a dragon in there, I'm very, very excited to start listening to that. So once that got going, we had this really small library at my private Catholic school. And this is going to sound crazy, but they actually kept their fantasy books at the private Catholic school I went to.
Hmm.
Um, and there was this story, this series of books by a guy named Brian Jacques called Redwall. It's little critters with swords and a little bit of magic stuff going on in there. So it's mice with swords fighting foxes with swords. And I just devoured that entire series. It's still something that I remember so, so fondly. Even when I was going to and from college in South Carolina, I would put on old Redwall books just for the ride, just so I could listen to that and kind of bring me back to that time. Throw in the games that I played growing up, Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, et cetera, et cetera. I got a lot of nerddom in me, and that's kind of where fantasy started for me.
And so, as my listeners may know, I'm a professor and you're a professor with me. So, how did you let this transition into kind of your work and then also you're obviously writing your books?
So, coming from young Andy, I played with toys. I played with action figures, right? So
Of course,
I
we all
would
did.
made up yeah, I made up these stories in my head all the time. And as I grew up, I kind of held on to that story. So I wanted to put it on the page. And, going to college, I was like, oh, well, I need to get better at writing. So that's kind of what transitioned me into the English major. And then I got an MA in writing, and I got an MFA in creative writing. And that MFA that I went to, I looked for specific programs that allowed for speculative fiction because there are some programs who really don't want you to play with magic or play with the weird stuff. So I had to look for specific programs to get me to where I wanted to be. And that's kind of how that conveyed myself to that writing style, fantasy. And I still look for speculative journals to try to publish in. I published that fantasy book just this past year. So it's still something that's really, really dear to my heart. And even though I don't use this name for my professional publications, I want to be in the fantasy realm. So this is what I'm working with.
No, no, absolutely. So then let's start going down the nostalgia road a little bit. How would you say nostalgia has impacted your fandom? Do you still get these feelings like you were talking about the listening to the audiobooks, the same ones that you read as you when you were younger? How does nostalgia play into that?
Well, and nostalgia in general, it can be that really bittersweet thing where you get these really, really happy feelings, and then you kind of feel like you're missing some of that at the same time. Fantasy in general provides, and I don't want to use this as a derogatory term, an escapist route.
Hmm.
Um, Fantasy is an escapist style of writing where you get to create, you get to make things brand new. You don't have to play in the real world. And I think a lot of people in the fantasy and in nerddom in general, we're attached to these lost times where we could escape into fantastic created worlds.
Hmm.
I don't know how many millennials have played around with Pokemon and Harry Potter, but they still have some really serious feelings about those. Go further back, you obviously got the Tolkiens and things like that. People are still connected to the fantasy realm because it brings them to places that they once were, and it brings them to places that are just not here. And with everything that's going on in the world right now, we all need that escapist type of mentality. And for nostalgia in particular, it brings us back to a time where we felt a little bit better about the world.
Mm.
Maybe we were less jaded than we are right now, but that is one of the things that nostalgia does for us, and
That's a way to
fantasy
put it.
again. Yes, exactly. It brings us to a different time frame.
You mentioned one of the big things that's really popular. It is summer 2026 right now, but over the past year, Pokemon cards have exploded again,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Um,
and ever since COVID, really, everybody got those COVID checks, and they're like, I'm gonna spend it on some Pokemon.
yeah, and I think reiterating what you just said, it takes people back to a time where, we had less worries. We had not a care in the world. We were, not worrying about catching this viral disease
We're
and
worried about catching them all.
yeah, 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 exactly. Um, so how would you say you've brought nostalgia into your writing, or how have you let it impact your writing?
So my first book that I tried to write was all of the stories that I had as a kid. And so that was the easy connection to nostalgia there.
Hmm.
Um, But while I was in my MFA writing, and you'll appreciate this, my thesis for my MFA, since you're going through all that right now. Um,
No.
I had my thesis advisor. He's like, "Hey, I know this is what you're planning, but we're going to push that to the side right now. I don't want you to think about it for a month. What I want you to do is outline a couple other books that you can work with." And as I'm thinking about this, I like to have on background noise. And are you familiar with One Piece at all?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so One Piece, it's got over 1,100 episodes or something now. It's really, really long. But this is something I grew up on, right? It
Mhm.
started in early 2000s, 1999, somewhere in there. So I traveled the Grand Line with Luffy, right? And I have this on in the background, and now I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I can do something like that. So I used some of my nostalgia for One Piece as a kind of a jumping off point
I
into
love
this
that.
book that I just published last year. Whereas, they're just pirates going around with devil fruits. I've got pirates on jet-propelled surfboards, right? So using that nostalgic trip from my thesis, mixing it with another, and again, something you'll appreciate as a Disney person, Treasure Planet. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the scene with Jim Hawkins on his little solar board. I paired One Piece and that solar board moment, which again, as a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I wanted one of those so bad, and I cannot be the only one. Pairing those two things, that was a great jumping off point for me to create this brand new world. Um, so that was one of these big things that kind of pushed me through nostalgia into creation. And even in my reading, there are books that I've loved way back when that it's still affecting how I read today. One of my friends who I met through publishing, he wrote a book that was kind of marketed as Pokemon for adults.
Mm,
So it's like gauntlet battles between creatures that they controlled. I was like,
mhm.
yes, I want to read that because I knew exactly where he was coming from with that nostalgic trip. That's what he came off of, much like I came off of One Piece to create this work that I have.
It is. I love Atlantis, Treasure Planet, that whole time. And I cannot believe that next year in 2027, it is going to be the 25th anniversary of Treasure Planet.
That baffles me. And I still I gotta hate on the animation industry just simply because they moved away from that style. I know it was wildly expensive for Atlantis and Treasure Planet, but
Mhm.
man, it was so great. And yeah, I'll still again, this is nostalgia to a T. I will put on Treasure Planet and just enjoy every single moment of it. Anytime I see the cyborg on the screen, it's like this is the best bad guy anyone's ever written. So I love him.
Absolutely. And like you said, it was the end of the Renaissance, the Disney Renaissance. We came up with like The Little Mermaid and Lion King and huge hits like that. And towards the end, we were coming back down again. And Treasure Planet, though beautiful, is very underrated and
Yeah.
very, very,
And if there is a live action adaptation that people would want to see, I would think either Atlantis or Treasure Planet would be so good for that. It would be
absolutely.
crazy cinema. So
So you mentioned when you were describing how you fell in love with fantasy, the push from your parents to, kind of push you into that. One of the things that I'm looking at for my dissertation is this concept of generational fandom and how it kind of gets tossed and pushed, among generations because of that. How would you say that fantasy is still remaining powerful across multiple generations?
so fantasy, the way it is attached to people, a lot of people love the fireworks, the pyrotechnics of it all, the creativity. That's always going to be one of the big draws for a lot of people. People like weird magic, people like dragons. That glitz and glamour is something a lot of people lean towards. It's that kind of hook that gets people involved. But if you have all style and no substance, there's not a lot of staying power to that. A lot of people can write some really, really cool worlds or events or magic, but the stories that last, they're usually going to be kind of drawn through, if you want to go with like thematic development or character or just generally great writing. Um, if we're talking about themes, we're always going to have the overcoming the odds, overcoming the evil, perseverance through hard times, things that anyone can attach themselves to. If you want to go with character development, it's that outcast kid that a lot of readers of fantasy will appreciate because a lot of readers of fantasy, they felt like that outcast kid when they were younger. They're going to get drawn to those characters and how those characters evolve. That's going to be one of the big draws. You can kind of work with theme and character on some of the major ones. Like if you're working with Lord of the Rings, people love Sam and Frodo.
Hmm.
Right? They're great characters. They're the underdogs. They're trying to overcome something way more powerful than they are. And a lot of us can see ourselves within Sam and Frodo.
Hmm.
And if you go further on down the line, Harry Potter, he was kind of this orphan kid. Grand Destiny obviously came and took him a different route. Then you get Katniss Everdeen, somebody like that, who she was from the wrong side of the tracks, and then she is the one who changed the world. And a lot of people love that type of character development. Doesn't matter where you come from, you can get there. And if you go into a little bit more adult focused fantasy, you have people like Ned Stark, who everybody loves. He's just this honorable guy, but in the same world, you have people like Tyrion, who
Hmm.
they scheme, but he's still a great character. Game of Thrones is a little bit different than your classic fantasy Lord of the Rings, because it was black and white, good and evil in Lord of the Rings. And then in Game of Thrones, it's kind of these shades of gray. So you can see the themes and the characters changing a little bit across this generational gap. And I think the older people get, the more they want these more complex and morally gray areas. But when we're younger, when we get hooked into it, we love to see that easy. Hey, this is the hero I can root for. I want to root for Luke Skywalker. I'm afraid of Darth Vader. But as adults, we're like, yeah, that was a fun story. Is it the best writing that's ever survived? Probably not. Do I still love Star Wars? Hell yeah. Okay. Absolutely. But I'm not going to say again, it is Ulysses. It's just not that. Um, so that's, I think, the big staying power. But what is really separating good fantasy from bad fantasy nowadays and how it's lasting is that the writers who are willing to write fantasy, they're way better now.
Hmm.
Um, for decades and decades, fantasy has been that other thing. You can go back to the 1920s with the pennies and like Lovecraft and his weird fiction and things like that. A lot of people thought it was slop. It
Hmm.
was really formulaic. All right, they do this, they do this, they do that. Great. Okay, not great writing. But now you have people who are winning MacArthur Genius Grants. N.K. Jemisin is freaking amazing. She is a brilliant writer. Colson Whitehead does the same kind of thing. You can see some people who are really, really strong writers, not just in the fantasy shtick, but in literary fiction in general, who are willing to go there. So I think as we've moved, I know this is kind of getting a little bit outside the question.
No, no, no,
As
you're fine.
as we moved, fantasy, obviously it hits that nostalgia with some of the more tropey things, but now more and more really talented writers are powering through with that fantasy style. Does that
Would you,
kind of make sense?
absolutely. Would you agree, or you're more immersed in the fantasy world than I am, obviously being a writer. But would you agree with the statement that I would say today's authors and fantasy writers are definitely standing on the shoulders of like the C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. We couldn't have Game of Thrones without something like Chronicles of Narnia, or sorry, Narnia, or the Lord of
Yeah,
the Rings, or whatever that came before it.
absolutely. And so Lord of the Rings is the one that a lot of people like and as like the generative one for modern fantasy. But you can go way further back. You can talk about all the mythologies. You can talk about Frankenstein from Shelley and things like
Hmm.
that. Beowulf has a lot of
Oh,
fantastical elements.
sorry.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So
High
there's a
school
lot of
PTSD with
fantasy.
when every time I hear the word Beowulf.
Yeah, there's a lot of fantasy that exists in academia. But once we got past Shelley, you can say a little bit of fantasy in Poe. Academia kind of thought it was the other for a long, long time.
Hmm.
And then Tolkien, Lewis, the Inklings over in Oxford, they kind of pushed fantasy back up in the 1920s and 30s. Um, so that's kind of where things changed a little bit, and it's just gotten better and better and better over the last few decades. Is there still bad fantasy out there? Yeah. I mean, Twilight's not great. Uh, Twilight's not great, okay? But
I'm gonna get 1,000 hate emails right after this episode drop. No, I'm just kidding.
it's not great, okay? But it's a lovely story. It's not great fantasy, okay?
It's a love story.
But yeah, and to their credit, they did fall in love and had a baby named after the Loch Ness Monster. Um, I know my Twilight, okay? Come at me. But yeah, so that's kind of where fantasy is. C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and if you want to go further back, Shelley, Poe, those are probably the old school titans. Then you get kind of the new school ones, Philip K. Dick, Ursula K. Le Guin. You can talk a little bit about Octavia Butler. Some of those good people are just powerhouses. And nowadays, you've got you, K. Jemisin, love her. China Mieville is incredible. A lot of people question that person's politics, but he's awesome. Okay. So that's kind of where we're at. There's some really, really talented fantasy writers nowadays. And there's still really popular fantasy writers who do have some writing chops. J.K. Rowling, again, say what you will about her as a person,
Mhm.
fine. She's a good writer.
I have to say we don't talk about her anymore, but we can talk about the story every day.
And, and
How
modern
powerful.
fantasy is not modern fantasy without Harry Potter. So,
And then it's the same thing. We're talking like just like Treasure Planet, 20 some years later, we still have this impact on new generations. And we got the new series coming out on HBO Max with John Lithgow and a whole new generation playing the children that basically this new generation has grown up with.
and it does make me feel so old. I'm like, it's too soon to have a remake of this already. And still might be too soon. But then I think about it as like, I guess that book did come out almost 30 years ago. So it's fair.
Well, we've talked about the past a little bit. I want to kind of shift and look at the future. So what modern fantasy trends kind of excite you that you see coming down the pipeline? And what are some of the things you hope kind of never goes away?
So the trends that I really love seeing nowadays, there's two major ones that I really like. Um, Subgenre blending is one of those, so that's more for the writer. It's taking multiple styles of fantasy and kind of putting them together. The most obvious one is sci-fi fantasy. A lot of people play with both tech and magic within their fantasy worlds. And so that's been a fairly common genre blend for a long, long time. But now we're getting a lot of other genres. Romantasy has taken off over the last decade. Thank Book Talk for that for a lot of it. Again, thank Twilight for some of that romantasy there. You've got things like Court of Thorns and Roses and Fourth Wing that have just exploded to popularity. And Book Talk has its own world with so many independent authors who do romantasy. It's huge. But then you got all the punk genres. So steampunk, biopunk, cyberpunk, solar punk. My surf pirates is the solar punk world. So there's those type of things. One of my favorite fantasy series that have released in the last couple of years It's a fantasy take on Sherlock Holmes.
Hmm.
So detective fiction mixed with fantasy. It's Robert Jackson Bennett, Tainted Cup. You should all read it. Yes. Okay. So that's probably been my favorite series over the last few years. And so that's the big subgenre blending that I love seeing, just because it takes the sword and sorcery that we're really accustomed with in fantasy and kind of just turns it a little bit. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's still sword and sorcery stuff going on, but there's a lot of other tropes and elements that you can infuse from the other genres. But the other big one is the diversity of voices within fantasy. Um, for decades, it was a straight white guys arena, and there are still straight white guys. I'm a straight white guy. I write fantasy, so like it's still a straight white guy arena in some ways, but there are so many diverse voices now. If you are looking for a queer love story in fantasy, they have that. If you're looking for something neuroatypical, they have that. If you're looking for something of any different race, any different religion, there's some fantasy element, there's some author who is working with that. So the diverse voices in fantasy now is at an all-time high. Yes, independent publishing has made it a lot easier for those voices to exist. But a lot of agents nowadays, if you want to go the traditional publishing route, they're specifically looking for diverse voices. So having that little rub on things, I think, is a really, really good thing. So those are the two big trends that I'm loving seeing in modern fantasy. Uh, if you're looking for things that I hope will never go away, it's world building. That almost every fantasy author is going to say world building is one of their favorite things that they can do, and that's usually how I get sucked in. Uh, I will end up loving characters. I will end up loving a story, but if there's a really good hook on whatever world is being built, that's the kind of thing I want to read. So every day people are coming up with brand new worlds that are just so, so cool. There's still some elements that are kind of overused, overplayed, cliche. Sure, if you want to go those, but there's still some big love for it. In the sci-fi world, three of the most popular series, they're all Romanesque in space. If we want to go with Pierce Brown's Red Rising, Ruokio's Sun Eater, and then James Islington's Will of Many, all of them have a Romanesque backing to their space worlds. But at the same time, there are worlds that are inhabited by Lovecraftian robots from this series called Gunmetal Gods, Robert Jackson Bennett. It's biopunk, where all their tech and science and magic comes from these fallen leviathans they find. So there's some brand new worlds, and then there's some other tropey ones, but the world building is still so, so strong, and that's the one big thing I hope never goes away in fantasy.
Well, I definitely want to continue talking about world building in a second and my next question. But you hit on something I kind of want to roam on here a little bit is kind of the integration of different genres together. Would
Okay,
you see
blending.
that that is becoming more and more popular? Just an example, and not a great example, but in the next Avengers movie, we're going to see like X-Men, Avengers, and multiple groups or fandoms or subcultures coming together. Would you see that's becoming more prevalent?
I would argue that it is, and not just in genre blending, but in IP blending. I know I've talked to you about my love of Magic the Gathering before.
Mhm.
Um, And if you're a Magic player, there are very different opinions on the universes beyond, but they're releasing a Marvel set in a
Mhm.
couple weeks. They've done a lot of stuff with Warhammer. They've done Walking Dead. They did Doctor Who. So they're bringing in other IPs to push their game to other fandoms. So I definitely understand the business mentality behind that. I
Mhm.
think it makes a lot of sense to bring in new ideas, new minds, and new fans. Uh, there is obviously that risk of alienating like older fans though. So if I'm an X-Men guy, ride or die, am I interested in going to see the Avengers because the X-Men will appear? Do I have to, or is that just going to turn me off?
Mhm.
If I'm just a Magic the Gathering person, am I turned off by all of these other IPs coming in? Me personally, a little. So I'm in that one camp where I'm like, I don't really want to see all these things in my game. I want my fantasy. I don't want all these other ones coming in. But at the same time, I definitely understand the business mentality of bringing in new wallets more than anything else. So I can get that. As far as writing goes, I do think the blending is really, really nice. But some people, they want to stick to one niche, and those people are all going to stick to that niche, and that's fine. If you want to try to open yourself up, like mine is sci-fi fantasy and it's solar punk. Solar punk is a little bit of a niche, but I'm hoping it relates to both fantasy and sci-fi people at the same time. So there's a little bit of give and take when it gets to blending both IPs and genre.
I lied a little bit. I'm going to skip back to world building again in a little bit. Because you kind of hit something else that I wanted to talk about now. So if you're bringing in these other IPs, and just in case my listeners, IP is intellectual property, which is different genres or different kind of fandoms coming together. Again, like the X-Men and the Avengers, just like that. But I would say, you gave us the example of Magic the Gathering bringing in Disney, or sorry, Marvel. They just brought in, Spider-Man. I saw the Spider-Man cards come out. Um,
And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
yeah, so is this nostalgia baiting? Is it lazy marketing? Or is it just, catering to the consumer?
I'm going to say yes, all right, to all these things.
Okay.
I definitely think I'm going to start with catering to the consumer, right? There are a lot of people who love these IPs, so it's easier to hand these things out to those people. They're going to be more apt to buy them. Um, does that kind of coincide with nostalgia baiting? Probably. For Magic the Gathering, fantasy author. I love Lord of the Rings. There was a Lord of the Rings set a couple years ago,
Mhm.
and I bought that to a T. So I also like Marvel, but I'm now so less interested. It's kind of like uh, the superhero movies just falling off, exhaustion, superhero exhaustion. So there's that kind of thing. Um, I do think it's savvy marketing so you can get other people buying your product because your longtime fans are probably going to buy it anyway, and then it'll bring new people in it. So there is that. But is it the same thing as that feeling you get from nostalgia? Is me playing Iron Man in a game of Magic going to react the same as me playing one of my favorite cards from way back when? No. Is it going to be the same feeling I got when I first heard Tony Stark say Avengers or Captain America say Avengers Assemble? Probably not. They have a card, Avengers Assemble. Awesome. Is it the same thing? Is there going to be that feeling, that wistful nature where you kind of go back in time?
Mhm.
For some people, it might hit that way, but I think it's not the same. And I know nostalgia, it's never going to be the same feeling. You're always going to want to go back to that time. Can't be done. But to me, it hits wrong. So I might be in the minority in that feeling. I don't necessarily love that they're doing that. And again, I'll stick to Magic here real quick.
Mhm.
If I'm seeing my fantasy world that used to be inhabited by warriors and dragons and angels and merfolk, really fantasy-centered things all on the battlefield where I could kind of envision that battlefield. Now it's got SpongeBob, Tony Stark, a My Little Pony, and Rick from The Walking Dead. That doesn't hit the same to me. So
Sounds like a
I
fun dinner
think,
party.
Oh yeah, it sounds ridiculous. And there was a meme years ago about SpongeBob being introduced in Magic, and sure enough, SpongeBob got introduced into Magic. So to me, it does turn me off from the thing I love. But as again, a consumer, I understand why Wizards of the Coast, the people who create Magic the Gathering, are going the route they do because it brings in new people to their game. And once those new people learn the game, they already know it. They can just jump in whenever they want. They can grab another pack whenever they want. So it's just another possible target. And all the people who've been playing since the 1990s, are they really going to give it up just because SpongeBob's on the battlefield?
Probably
Probably. So yeah, it's nostalgia baiting, it's savvy marketing. I still don't like it. So
I would, in my very humble opinion, would also say it's generational also because I would argue if you're playing, say, with, your niece or nephew who is now 10, 11 years old, they would have a different experience playing that SpongeBob card because, they grew up immersed totally in like SpongeBob. I can probably call it in 10 years there's going to be something like a Bluey line introduced to Magic the Gathering because that's going to be the next generation of fans.
and I think that's such a great way to look at it. And I spent some time on Reddit, and somebody had to post in the Magic the Gathering Reddit community saying, "Hey, if you go to the store and it's somebody's first time playing Magic simply because it's the Marvel set, don't be mean." Right? These people are just trying to learn the game. They found something they like. And especially if they're younger, I would wager most of the younger crowd, they're going to want to play with Tony Stark or Magneto or Wolverine, any of those guys. They're probably not going to want to play with somebody like Urza, Lord High Artificer, because
Mhm.
nobody knows who that is outside of the Magic community. And a lot of fandoms, a lot of nerddoms, they can be a little toxic at times. Um, Star Wars community, well, just that's me. Okay, I'm talking about myself right now. We can be a little bit toxic at times. All right, so that is one thing about this nostalgic hits and bringing in new players as something that's very, very smart. And hopefully, people don't treat these new fans the same or any differently than the old school folks. So,
As promised, coming back here, my last few questions are we're gonna talk about these immersive worlds that your readers and all fantasy readers and fans enjoy. So for you in particular, what is kind of your creative process in creating these fantasy worlds? Because you need to really make them feel both magical, yet at the same time, like believable, right? This could happen. So how do you do that and find that happy medium?
all right. So, for my kind of like the starting process for me, a lot of it comes from taking in other media. That's kind of where I get some of the ideas, where I just try to put a little rub on it. So like One Piece into a surf pirate world. I was playing a game called Frostpunk, and now I'm trying to do a detective story in a snow apocalypse type of thing.
Oh, fun.
So like that's kind of where I get my starting points, but then trying to play that line, towing it, you kind of got to fall into one of two categories. Uh, and this is specifically with fantasy, so not going into any of the sci-fi stuff. But you either have to make the magic so rare that your main characters are kind of discovering it along the way, where they can kind of bring the reader along with them. And think of that like a Harry Potter thing,
Mhm.
right? Harry did not know magic existed. And so when he figured it out, when he had the blinders pulled back, the readers were figuring it out at the same time. In Lord of the Rings, magic rarely happens on the page. And when it does, it's kind of so subdued that there's still this like kind of mystical feeling of That's totally believable.
Hmm.
But you can also go the exact opposite route and just make magic so every day that everyone is accustomed to it. And then your main points of view just don't react to it. Like it's just a natural state of the world. They aren't taken by surprise when something goes flying over their head. It's just normalcy. So you
Hmm.
got to kind of fall into one of those two camps. One, where your character has to figure it out as they go, or two, they already know about it as you move. Because you don't, as a fantasy author, you don't want to spend all your time world building or creating the magic system or explaining the rules. Because readers can, and nowadays it's much worse, they don't have the attention span to push towards that. They
Hmm.
want to get moved along in the story. So what you got to focus on is the character and the events. Is this story moving? And do I care about the character who is existing in this world? Everything else, again, the pyrotechnics, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, you can talk about magic, you can talk about the weird things over there, but unless you have a character where things are happening and they are making things happen, the story's not going to jibe that well. So, world building, spend a lot of time off the page doing it. It's all in here, and you have to figure out a way to put it kind of naturally on the page as you move. It's either all in your face all the time and nobody cares, or it's something that you are discovering with the reader. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. So within this process, then, do you build the world first, or do you build the storyline first and then build the world around that?
It kind of depends on the work. The Surf Pirates story, I kind of had an idea of a group, but then I wanted to build the world around it. So there's a lot of lore and stuff in epigraphs at the or at the start of every single chapter. That's where my world building gets done, and the chapters themselves are the events. So that one I kind of did the world first. With the ones that I'm working on right now, it's more story focused. Like, okay, I need this, this, and this to happen, and I want this character to have this quality, that quality, this quality, and then this is how they're going to come face to face with their own issues, type of thing. And then the world is kind of being fleshed out as I go. In general, for a lot of large scale writing, there's plotters and there's pantsers,
Hmm.
people who try to plot out the story first, and I usually fall into that category where I want to know everything that's happening as I move. So the world's not built, but the story is, so I can hit those beats when I need to. But then the other camp is the pantser, where they're flying by the seat of their pants and just seeing how things stick as they move, and they can change the story how they want as they go. Um, I think I would have an aneurysm if I just went that route. I love I'm in academia. I love my outlines. Okay. I need to have that structure. But there are some people who do really, really good work with just flying by the seat of their pants and seeing how things go. Um, so yeah, I like my story built first more often than not
Hmm.
before I start trying to flesh out the world, the lore, the histories, and things like that.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, here's a fun one. If you could take our listeners or your readers into one of the fantasy experiences from your childhood, any of them, book, movie, game, family memory, I don't care. What would it be?
I'm going to go with I'm going to talk about two. Uh, and weirdly enough, they're not books. So the first one is getting Red version in 96.
Okay.
So that first jump into the Pokemon world, trying to figure out all these things. Um, I still play like ROM hacks for Pokemon nowadays, but that first time playing Red version and my brother had Blue version, where we had to figure out what we could see on these routes and how they could evolve and things like that. And then we got hooked into the anime and everything. And then the cards came out. It was just that first little kernel that blossomed into a giant world of Pokemon. So the first time we did Red version was such a great experience for me. And then everything that came after that for Pokemon was great. The other single experience in fantasy that I loved, and again, say what you will about the movie, but going to the premiere of Force Awakens,
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up, I loved the original trilogy, watched that with my parents constantly. Um,
Hmm.
Went to see all of the prequels in theaters multiple times, but this is when I was like 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever.
Same. Yep.
But Force Awakens, now I'm
An
an
adult.
adult, and this is an experience now. So now I'm getting to see all of these people dressed in all. I was in a Darth Maul morph suit.
Yes.
And so I had the double-bladed lightsaber, I had the cloak, and then I had my morph suit on. I was ready. And do you think I was the most ridiculous person there?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So, and with fantasy and fandom and nostalgia, The Force Awakens was one of the purest moments of enjoyment from a fandom that I have ever been a part of. Because we were all walking into this brand new era of Star Wars. Again, say what you want about the sequels, fine. But that night, that first night at the 12:01 showing or whatever, was
Hmm.
just a brilliant time. It
Hmm.
was just so much fun. So uh, I still love it. It was great. No complaints, 10 out of 10. It was so much fun.
Too bad we did not know each other back then because that would have been fun to go to.
Yeah. Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, I was in the morph suit with Darth Maul. One of my buddies was in Vader. Somebody else had the Stormtrooper costume. So it was
Nice.
great. And then there were multiple Chewbaccas in line. So it was great.
I will never forget that feeling of spoiler alert if you haven't seen Force Awakens, though it was, that long ago now, but that feeling when
I think we've given it enough
we're
time.
okay, I can say what happens in the plot.
Statute of limitations is up now.
When Han Solo gets stabbed, I will never forget that feeling.
My jaw dropped.
Me too. I almost screamed in this theater, and you just
Yeah.
hear very audible gasps
Oh man,
from
it
everybody.
was so good.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's one of the things about movie theaters in general. It's just such a collective experience. You can talk some of the similarities with Deathly Hallows Part Two,
Hmm.
and then the final Avengers movie
Hmm.
with the snap.
The end game.
Um,
Yeah.
yep, those moments. Again, I am definitely outing myself as super nerd. I was at the midnight showing to all of these things, right? So so that collective experience, that it's one of the most joyous things for nostalgia, for fantasy. It brings a lot of people together, and we're all experiencing some of these things as a collective unit. So yeah, Force Awakens, Endgame, and Deathly Hallows Part Two were all so much fun being, I don't want to say locked in a theater, but in a theater together with a bunch of people who think the exact same about the characters on the screen. So it's
Mhm.
just a great peer experience.
Absolutely. All right, before we wrap up, do you want to tell us, or if you can, if it's, under Secret Service lock and key, I completely understand. But do you want to tell the listeners about any kind of upcoming projects or things that you may have coming up? And also, please tell them where they can find your current stuff that you have out right now.
Yeah, let me go grab a copy of that real quick so I can at least show the cover.
Yes, we love a good visual.
All right. So, as far as the thing that's out right now, it's this right here. It's called Curse of the Claimed. Um, Solar punk surf pirate fantasy. Okay, so a lot of ocean magic where some young pirates who are Robin Hood-esque get in over their heads with the ocean-bound mafia and all hell breaks loose. So that's kind of the gist of that, and that leads directly into some of the things that I'm working on right now. I'm finishing up book two. I've got, I think, 7 more chapters to edit out. Um, One, I have to do quite a bit of editing too, because I have to extend a couple of scenes here and there. Uh, and then I have to add the epigraphs for my lore headings for all the chapters. Um, but that is on its way to being done. And then what I'm doing, the goal once you are editing a book, you always want to be writing a different one because then you're not just stuck in that slog of editing, 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 editing. And I wanted to get away from the Surf Pirates just to let that settle for a little bit. So I'm writing that Frostpunk detective story.
Oh.
Since I loved Tainted Cup so much, I wanted to do something similar with that and put it in a snow apocalypse type world. One city is all that's left, and the head of that city, the head of the remaining human population, his son's body is found, and then a detective and her trusty companion, they've got to figure out what happened there. So that is kind of what I'm working on there again, trying to play with that fantasy element. Dystopia, a lot of people really love that style. Dystopia, detective, so there's some subgenre blending right there. So I'm just following in with the trends.
That sounds really interesting. I cannot wait till that comes out because I
Yeah,
love me a
it
good
should be
detective
fun.
story. All right. I lost my notes here, so sorry. Before we leave, though, I want to jump in with what we call the rapid fire question. So I'm going to throw something at you. Just tell me your first thoughts, okay?
Done and done.
Alrighty. Favorite fantasy franchise of all time?
Fantasy franchise of all time. I think I have to lean towards Magic the Gathering just because I've played it so long, but Pokemon is right up there with me. Even though I don't play the card game, it's still huge to me. And if we go written work fantasy, it's the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. So I have a card game, I have a video game, and a book that is my favorite fantasy genre of each one.
I think
Movies, Star
you,
Wars. Okay.
yeah. I think you've sufficiently picked everything. That's great.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that.
So I again, nerd.
Here's a good one. Dragons or wizards?
Oh, dragons for sure. I adore dragons. I For my bachelor party down in New Orleans, we went to this wood carving place, and I got a rather expensive carved dragon skull type of thing.
Very cool.
That was my brother's gift to me for my bachelor party. So, oh, definitely dragons all the time. If you ask anyone who plays Magic the Gathering with me, I'm a dragon person. Okay,
All right.
it's great.
Magic sword or magic staff?
Give me my sword. All right. I mean,
Sword?
the staffs are cool, but I feel like I need a much more grizzled beard and pointy hat to wield a staff appropriately. With a
Okay.
sword, I can just go, all right, and swing at things.
I think it needs to be like gray also. You're still
Yeah,
a
you
little too
kind of need
dark.
it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
or if I print or if I dye everything pitch black, then I think I could get away with the staff too.
Okay, okay, I see
But then
it.
I'm an evil wizard, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Mm. Ooh, this is a loaded question because I
Oh
don't know
gosh.
how I feel and I don't know which one I would pick. Book first or movie first?
I'm a book first person.
Mm.
And
Purist.
yeah, and I do think that has hurt some movie experiences for me in the
Mhm.
past, but at the same time, I like to know everything the original author intended, because that is what they wanted to do. When it's a book made into a movie, I know the screenwriters, they have free access to change it. And so it's more their version than the person who actually envisioned the world. So I like the book first. That's not to say that there aren't any movies that I don't think are better than books. V for Vendetta, that is my favorite movie of all time, and I do think it is better than the original graphic novel by Alan Moore. Um, Gosh, yeah, I just want to blow up Parliament now. Okay.
I think I know the answer to this one, but the last one. What fantasy creature would you have as a pet?
mean, it's going to be hard for me to not say dragon.
That's what I was thinking.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, it's going to be, but if we want to go very, very specific, my current dog is a 170-pound Newfoundland who is named Arcanine.
Ah, yes.
So, uh, if you want to go very specific, maybe an Arcanine, but dragon would be a pretty cool thing for me to
I think
have, I
so.
think.
I think so. And I think I would have to name it Mushu just because of Milan.
My favorite dragon in all of literature is named Calendros.
Oh,
It's from the Dragonlance books. And so if anybody ever read Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, and those kind of people, awesome, great stuff. Archie Arcanine, his middle name is Calendros. So
oh,
yeah, so got to have a little dragon connection too.
there you go. There you go. Well, my friend, we are at that time for the episode. So, first of all, I thank you, thank you, thank you. I had a great time talking to you today, and I welcome you back. Please, anytime, come join us again. Will you, when your new book comes out?
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, absolutely. If there's any time you want to nerd out about anything, I will gladly come back.
Next
I'm not
season,
that
let's
far
do it.
away, so.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friends, my listeners, for joining us today. Join us next time for episode 3, where we are going to jump into the film industry again. And joining me for that episode is another friend of mine. I say it every week. They're all friends of mine, though. Brian Shelton, who is a film history professor and media professor. So that'll be really fun. Join us on episode 3. And as Mickey says, my friend Mickey Mouse, we'll see ya real soon.